My name is Ariel Kotzel. This is Guy Gordon. Together we are K&CO. Um, we're going to try to get this to work in a second.
Tov.
Yes?
I think so.
All right. So you can tell who is who by the glasses. And what we do is we do all these things called branding and strategy and communication and all that. Today we want to talk specifically about something that underlies all of these things, which is,
Working.
okay, um, works with the clicker.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I want to go through some, very quickly, through some main points of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about how to make your presentation stand out in the crowd of startups. We're going to talk about understanding the investor mindset and how to penetrate it. We'll talk about the 10 slides that you need to make your presentation more engaging and why a better looking presentation is a better presentation. Now, not really. Not really. But what's important for me for you to understand is that what you just felt is exactly the opposite of what you need to be doing. And a lot of presentations that you see are like this. I don't know if you noticed, maybe I see this. When you see something like that and you see slides like this and you hear somebody talking like that, you're thinking, okay, I have better things to do. Okay? And that's the disconnect that we want to talk about. That disconnect is between what I, as a presenter, want to get across, what I'm talking about, and what the other side is willing to hear. That's very important because the other side has a very low capacity, especially in today's world, for receiving information. So whether you're talking to an investor or whether you're whatever information you're trying to get across, you need to understand that the other side is not necessarily interested in what you have to say and probably doesn't have the time, doesn't have the capacity, and doesn't have any of the attention span that you need for them to have in order to get that information across. I want to show you some. That holds true not just for presentations. This is the instruction manual. Remember Tamagotchi? So when my kids got a Tamagotchi, this is the instruction manual that came with it. Now, this is for like 5-year-olds or 8-year-olds. Even for parents of 8-year-olds, you see something like this, and the thing that you're thinking in your head is, there is no way that I'm going to be spending the next 3 hours understanding how this works. Okay? But this is about an attitude. The attitude of the people who put this together is, let me just throw this on the paper and send it out. I don't care what happens next, okay? You all know this. I have to tell you that I have my brother-in-law, when we were, let's say 10 years ago, I remember him buying a bed and calling me. Anytime that he bought anything from IKEA, he would call me because I, having grown up on Lego, loved putting things together, so I would just look at these things and enjoy putting them together. But he looked at it and said, there's no way that I'm going to be doing this, okay? And that's why IKEA put this little thing together. You know this little thing? You know what this says? If you have a question, if you don't know how to put this together, give us a call. But that's like built in. It's like it says, we know that you're not going to be able to do this. For example, I mean, in Israel, you know that when you drive around, a lot of times, and today, luckily, we have Waze and Google Maps, but you know that you come up against signs and you're thinking, where do I go from here? Okay? Or this, where you're driving down or walking down the street and there's a billboard. Now, you understand that in order to read this, you have to get out of your car, stand next to the billboard, and spend the next 8 minutes reading it. Okay? A billboard is supposed to be something that you see as you drive by. Okay? All of these are, this is something that a friend just posted on Facebook from an elevator in a building, in a really terrible building in Jerusalem. Okay? And does anybody know what this is? Al Gore, 2000. Okay? For those of you who don't know, this is a ballot from Miami, from Palm Beach, that the problem was that if you wanted to vote for Al Gore, you didn't know what hole you needed to punch with this thing. It seems like it's the one right next to this arrow, right? Well, it's not. It's this one. Okay? One of the reasons that Al Gore didn't win. And This is an interface from Microsoft Word from a few years ago. What am I supposed to do with this? And this is a website, okay? Not just legibility, but the amount of information, the way that it is transferred to you, okay? The amount of effort you need to do in order to find the information in here. Remember this? Anybody? Probably most people in this room. So when we started using the internet to find things, this is what it looked like. And this. And the better ones tried to kind of do it designed. But then these guys came along and did this thing. Now, it's not about the way that this is designed. It's not about the font. It's not about the colors. It's not about anything else. It's about how they make the information accessible to you. It's exactly the same thing between this and this. You're doing the same thing. You're searching something on the internet. Now, the place that we're sitting in today is built on this attitude, which said, let's make the information accessible to people. Let's clean it up. People just need to look for a word. So let's take away everything and give them what they want. Okay? And of course, let's make the math work for us. On to you.
Okay, so what does all of this have to do with how to get investors to pay attention? Well, Ariel has been talking for the last couple of minutes about the importance of empathy, about making it easy for people to get the information, to hear the message, to hear the story that they need to hear. Now, we all, I think, have to have a lot more empathy also for investors, which sounds sort of counterintuitive because we think of investors as these sort of, wealthy, influential people out there who wield a lot of influence and can help, determine which startups are going to take off and whose dreams are going to be dashed. But what a lot of people don't understand is that investors are also terrified half the time. They're terrified about letting the next unicorn, right, the next billion-dollar company slip through. And they need these unicorns for their funds to work. The problem with, of course, investors is that because they don't know where the next big company is out there, they need to speak to everybody because they can't afford not to. And contrary to what a lot of people think, investors are desperate to hear your startup story. But the problem is, and why we talk about the challenge of getting investors to pay attention, is that they have limited time, right? They've got lots of money and influence. They still have the same 24 hours a day that we do. And just getting through to them is the biggest challenge. And this is the challenge that most entrepreneurs face, is getting their attention, getting an audience with them, getting them to hear what you have to say. Now, Ariel spoke recently about the importance of not so much what it is you're saying, but what the other side needs to hear in order to be engaged, in order to be interested. This is where, when you're speaking to an investor, this is where you want to be, right? You want their attention, you want them to listen to your idea. But of course, the problem is that you have a lot of other startups, a lot of other entrepreneurs out there all vying for attention. And there's so much information and so many requests for meetings and pitches being sent that investors, they put up these sort of natural defenses. They need to be able to filter the amount of information, the amount of ideas being pitched to them all the time. So if you don't get the investor's attention, you're not even in the game, right? You're not going to get the first meeting or the second one or ultimately to be funded. So you have to be able to, before you even tell them what your idea is, be able to sneak in there through that small window of attention and time that they have for you. This is the first challenge. And just to drive this point home, I want to tell you a real story, okay? A few years ago, I was lucky enough to go skiing in beautiful Switzerland with some investor friends of mine. I was the only non-investor there, okay? So we arrive, and first day of skiing, we're all excited to get outside. There's like fresh powder, we're all waiting at the door with our coats on. And one guy's like still in the bathroom. So I was like, hey, dude, we're all ready to go. What's the story? And he says to me, give me a sec. Somebody just sent me a pitch, okay? So imagine that this is your pitch, right? It's not being viewed in some nice fancy office on Rothschild or in Herzliya. And it's not always going to be viewed like this, but it could be, okay? So he's sitting here and he's scrolling through. And he doesn't have much time. You can imagine he's got a lot more interesting things in his mind right now. And you're not going to secure investment. You're not going to, you're not going to convince him to invest right now. But you do need to be able to grab his attention and get him to follow up with you afterwards. So because your window is so tiny, you have to get the essential information across in the shortest amount of time. This is your first challenge. Before you even discuss your idea, before you inspire or engage, you just have to make it small enough so that he gets the information that he needs at this stage. And it's something that we can all relate to. Okay, I've got 3 young kids. They're all in Scouts in Tsofim, and this is like the typical message that I get from one of their Scout leaders about an event happening tomorrow, an outing. Now I'm in the middle of my working day, and I've got mails and phone calls and meetings about to happen, and then I get this, okay, and I have to scroll through this message in the middle of my day. I have to work hard to find the information that I need, okay? And God love them. I love the Scout leaders. They do great work. But now I'm working for them. And in fact, this is all I need to know. As a parent, I don't care what's going to happen on the till. I don't need the emojis. I just need to know tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, water, bakbuk maim 5 shekel, and a jacket. That's all. So this is the information that I need right now. And investors and audiences of all kinds are no different, okay? So the first thing you need to do is you need to keep it short. Like, for the love of God, make life easy for them and respect their time, because by keeping it short, you're going to get your message through, and ultimately that's going to help you. Okay, so that's what I was mentioning when I talked about empathy for your audiences, regardless of who they are. Now, publishers, of course, realized this a few years ago. And for anybody who reads Medium or other publisher sites, they often have this little estimated reading time here at the top. Now, what's it's basically, that's their ask, okay? That's their ask to me. They're asking me to commit 8 minutes of my time or 5 minutes of my time to read this article. Is 8 minutes too long? Is 5 minutes too long? Well, it all depends, right? Because we know that no matter how busy we are, we always have time for the things that we're interested in, right? I never have any time to sit down with my wife and go through bills. But I always, a 3-hour Netflix binge, sure, I got time for that. And investors are the same. They're also super busy, but they will give time to something that interests them. So make it interesting, okay? This is the super important next step after you've made it small enough to get through. What you do when you make it interesting is that you have basically bought yourself precious minutes of their attention and their time. And if you've made it this far, you're in a good place. But what you do next is super critical, because now that you have their attention, you need to sell your idea. And again, not selling in terms of selling it with the reasons or the features or benefits that you think should be interesting to them, but sell it to them on the basis of what they need to hear to be excited and involved in this idea. And ultimately, you have to make it convincing, right? This is all about convincing the investor, convincing the customer, whoever it is you're talking about, convincing them to get interested in your idea, to back it, to buy a product, whatever your end goal happens to be. And to convince, we have this handsome fella in here. Now, for those of you who don't know who John Draper was, he appeared in a TV show called Mad Men, which is about the advertising industry in New York in the 1960s and 70s. But beyond Don, what Don personifies is the approach that great advertising agencies had in being able to convince masses of people. And the way that they did it was, again, to bridge that disconnect that we began this talk about between what you want to say and what the other side needs to hear, to be willing to consider, to listen to your proposition, to buy your product.
Okay, thank you. The reason that they're bringing Don Draper into this is because we've both grown up in advertising before becoming, before opening shop. Now, what we learned in advertising is how do you take messages that are sometimes complicated, sometimes long. Sometimes you have a lot of information that you want to get across, but you don't have a lot of attention span on your audience's side. And how do you get them interested? Okay. So we'll show you two examples of how this was done within the ad agency, just to understand, and we'll break it back. We'll break it back down to how it's built. Okay. The Economist is a magazine that caters to businessmen and has contents that have to do with economics and politics and everything that drives finance. Okay, that means there's a certain specific type of clientele for this magazine, and the magazine wants to sell more magazines or have more subscriptions online. They came out with a campaign a few years ago that looked like this. This is the first ad that ran. I never read The Economist. Management trainee, age 42. For those of you who don't get it, if a management trainee is 42, that's something that a 20-year-old, that's the kind of job that a 20-year-old holds, okay? Would you like to sit next to you at dinner? A poster should contain no more than 8 words, which is the maximum the average reader can take in a single glance. This, however, is a poster for Economist readers, okay? So what is the message? And this is out on the street, and people are driving around and opening up magazines and opening up whatever and seeing these messages. This is the message they're seeing. What is the message that The Economist is bringing out, and why? Let's start with the message itself. The message says you're smart. That's what it says, okay? If I'll go back to this, a poster should contain no more than 8 words, which is the maximum an average reader can take in. Average reader. But this, however, is a poster for Economist readers, which are non-average, okay? Above average, okay? This is the message that's coming through. You're smart enough to get this, okay? Let's see what stands behind that. There's a strategy. The strategy is, we know you're smart, and this is the magazine for people like you, smart people, okay? But that's not enough, because you have to understand what the insight is behind this strategy. The insight is that people, business people, need, in order to make better decisions, they need to be smarter. If you're smarter, you make better decisions. How do you get smarter? You get informed. Where do you get informed? Okay, this is the message. So you have to understand what's happening. It actually starts with this. The process starts with the Economist saying, okay, who are we talking to? And what is it, like Guy said, that they need? Not what do we need to say. What are they looking for? They are looking for better information because they need to make better business decisions. Let's go from there, okay? Let's tell them we know that. And let's convince them that The Economist is the magazine for them. Let me show you another example. Remember this thing? Remember when you first saw this? You probably first saw this in a situation like this. Either walking into a store or seeing somebody else's PC, and you know, most people didn't know that this is like a peelable label and left it for years, okay? But this is an ad, okay? Now, you have to understand that Intel, all of us know, makes the chip, right? You buy a computer that says IBM or Dell or Lenovo or whatever on it. On top of that, they added a tiny little sticker that said Intel inside, okay? Now try to think back, like I said before. What's the message? What's the strategy? And what's the insight? The message is clear. Intel inside, okay? Inside this computer, there is something of Intel. Why? Because we want to tell people you're not buying, it doesn't really matter if it says IBM or Dell or Lenovo. You're buying the chip. That's what you're buying. Now, think of it as if you saw a second-rate car, whatever, a tiny little car, an Indian car, right? And on the hood, it had a little label that said Ferrari inside. Well, maybe with the Indian car you wouldn't believe it, but let's go to Toyota, okay? So if you bought a Toyota and it said on the hood Ferrari inside, you're thinking, okay, there's an engine in here that makes this car better. I'm buying the engine. And this is because it's the chip that makes the computer better, okay? Now, what Intel was trying to do is leap through the PC that you're building, that you're buying, and say to you, listen, you're actually buying Intel, Okay, that's a connection between Intel and the final customer, which is something that they never did before because they were a B2B company. But they wanted to get their name out there. They wanted you to know that the better computers are better because they have the Intel chip inside them. Okay, that's a way of convincing somebody of something that made. So if you're walking in a store and there's after seeing these little labels and there's a couple of computers and this one says Intel inside and that one doesn't, you're thinking, okay, well maybe this one's better. Okay, a way of convincing people. How many of you know what this is? Not enough. All right. This is called the
Fearless girl.
Fearless Girl. And this was put up a couple of years ago in front of that statue of the bull, which represents Wall Street. Okay, it was put the day before the International Women's Day as something to empower women. Specifically, it was done because there was an issue with the number of women employed within the financial world. And there's a whole story behind it, but I won't bother you with that. What you have to understand is that sometimes a message doesn't need words. It doesn't need, there's a message can be conveyed just visually. The impact of this thing, people flocked to have to take their photographs together, to see this thing. It was in the news all over the world because it had resonance. Now, the incredible thing about this is that they just put this this sculpture together and placed it in the right place, and then something happened between an existing sculpture and this sculpture. But the most important thing is the idea that stands behind this and the fact that people get it. Okay, the amount of effort that the people putting this idea together put in order to get the right girl in the right material in the right place in front of that bull. They did all of the work so that people could come and see it and intuitively get it. And that's the difference between putting together, let's say, a presentation that has those 36 bullets and 238 pages, or that Tamaguchi instruction manual, and just, vomiting at people, and an attitude that says, let me do all the work so that all you have to do is get it. Okay? This is what it looked like from the side. So everything that we've talked about up until now comes down to this. If you're able to understand something, I think economists think Intel inside, especially economists, if you're able to understand what that kernel of existing thought is inside your audience's head, what it already exists in there that you can tap into and do something with, that makes for this little moment. And that moment is precious. Because when that little pop happens inside people's heads, you have their attention. Now you can get the rest of the information through, and hopefully you'll do it well and convincingly, and make it short, make it concise, make it convincing, all of those things. But what you need to do is latch onto something that already exists in people's minds. You need to understand there's an audience on the other side, and that audience needs to be bought. You need to get them interested. That's what makes for the connect. Okay? That's how you connect. By understanding there's another person on the other side, and I need to make an effort to get them interested.
Okay, so finding these connections, discovering what it is that people need to hear, what it is that people already know to be true, is something that we have been doing together for a few years. So I want to bring it down from Intel and Fearless Girl and Wall Street, a couple of practical examples, and bring you through a very sort of summary process of how we've managed to make that connection and create that relevance in the last year. So I want to start off with what would on the face of it seem like a boring company to do this for. This is Exgen Capital. They are a sort of boutique, high-level investment company. They work with high net worth individuals, basically rich old folk, and institutions.
Very rich.
Very rich old folk. And they're really at the top of their game, right? The partners all come from Wall Street backgrounds. They have fantastic track record and a clientele to die for. But they basically still do what a lot of other Wall Street caliber teams out there do. They don't have any special product or tech or algorithm. And they were struggling with a couple of things. Their two main challenges when they spoke to prospects and tried to convince people to invest their money with them was A, what makes us different, right? We do the same things as other companies, so why us? Convince people to invest their money with us and not with other similar companies. And one of the biggest problems was they have a very diversified portfolio. So they're a small company, but they're invested in lots of different areas and, geographies. And people thought that they were lacking focus. Okay, so how do we make that connection with the people we want to work with and convince them to come on board and explain all of this? And if you had a look, this is what they looked like when we first met them, right? Typical finance style website, everything going up, the hockey sticks. It's all about returns and, seeing opportunities and stuff like that. So very, very sort of stodgy and corporate, very serious. So it looked serious. It looked like it was a serious company to do business with, but there was nothing inspiring, nothing to excite you or to convince you to work with these guys. But we knew that they had amazing clients and that they were smart clients. So we spoke to them and we wanted to understand why did you...
To the clients.
Yeah, we spoke to the clients. We wanted to understand why did you go with these guys with Exigent? What makes them special? What makes them different? So they basically told us, in a word, these guys find amazing opportunities. They find amazing investment opportunities that other companies can't. And when we went back to the partners at the company and we said, hey, we hear about these amazing opportunities that you find. Can you tell us a little bit about them? And they told us about opportunities in India in real estate and fintech companies in New Jersey. And then they told us about this company in Kentucky that they had invested in that develops coal technology. Coal? Pacham?
Picham.
Picham? And I'm like, who in the hell invests in coal? And this was like 2018, 19. And how did you guys get out there? And so what we realized at that moment was these guys are finding opportunities because they're looking in places other people aren't looking. Okay? And this is something that's really, really important in the world of investment, because the great opportunities are found where other people aren't looking at them, because then it's not a great opportunity. And what we realized that really set these guys apart and made them exceptional in the very sort of conservative world of investment was their curiosity, right? They couldn't help themselves. They were innately curious. So we thought, this is an interesting thing, because the people they work with, their clients, albeit they're a bit older and they've made their money in life, most of them, they're still very sort of curiously minded people. They still haven't lost that curiosity about the world. And these are the types of clients that Exigent wants to work with them. But how do you take an idea and an area like curiosity for an investment company and turn that into an advantage for their customers, for investors? How does their curiosity help give investors an edge? So we've thought about where curiosity has led, mankind over the ages, how it's sort of pushed people to boldly go and to discover new worlds and new opportunities in places that were not previously known. And how does this translate back into the world of investment? Well, while everybody else in the investment world is looking for opportunities in the same areas, whether it was Bitcoin and ICOs 3-4 years ago or alternative energy a decade ago, these guys are off the map completely. They're looking in places that nobody else is looking, and it's here that they find the most exciting and the most unique opportunities. And this is the larger story that really excites the type of investors that Exigent are looking to attract. So it's all about opportunity lies beyond, right? The investors could get the run-of-the-mill opportunities and investments anywhere else, but it's here that they find the really, really special opportunities. So now that we knew that we found something that could really interest and engage and convince the type of investors they want to work with. And then, of course, you've got to take the strategy and you have to bring that out into the world. And you have to tell the story. So you remember what you first saw, like what the website used to look like with the steps? Now when they come to the website, when they see the story of extant. It's one that tells a story about curiosity and discovery, and the amazing things that you can discover through having this way of looking at the world as an investor. And we speak about the fact that they have always marched to the beat of their own drum, and that they find what really drives them is to find hidden potential wherever it may be. And we unfolded this story a little bit more. I'm not going to go into what we did for them on the website, but the point I'm trying to make here is that we have now found a story which almost acts like I don't know if you how do you say this in Hebrew, but like a dog whistle. Okay, this is a story that's designed to appeal to a particular type of investor. They don't want to work with every type of.
I'll just explain the dog whistle analogy. A dog whistle is something that if I blow it, none of us will hear it, but a dog will. What Guy meant by a dog whistle is that this is designed to talk to a very specific set of people who get it. Okay, not all investors will see curiosity and think, okay, these are the people I want to talk to. But these guys, when we started talking to them, they said there's an affinity. Like we keep talking to these very highly, wealthy people who they keep telling us, you're like us when we were young. Okay, and we wanted to understand what that lies on. And it lied on the fact that their curiosity helps them find the investments that other people aren't even looking at. So if you go to other investment firms, they're all right now in, I don't know, Bitcoins. They're all right now in this. They're all now. And these guys are like all over the place, which was part of the problem that they had in explaining what it is that they do, because people would come in and say, why are you investing in all these things? But what makes that, and the incredible thing is that they had a fantastic track record, and anything they touched went gold. Okay, so this was a way to bring it back and say, okay, this is what makes us tick. If you're interested, read more. I just one more thing I want to say, Guy, is that you'll notice that we started out from the word curiosity, and then we had like a headline saying curiosity leads you places, and then there's a tiny little bit of information. So going back to what we said before, part of the deal is that you understand that the person on the other side does not have all the time in the world to now read I don't know what. You need to make it, you need to distill it into a very small, very potent capsule. Okay? If you're able to do that, they'll read through this whole website. Their whole website takes 4 minutes to read, top to bottom.
Less.
Okay? And it's evident when you come in. You know how like you open a magazine, you look at an article. So there's a picture. Okay, that looks interesting. Then you look at the headline. You think, okay, that sounds interesting. Then you read the blurbs, the stuff that pops out, and then you go in and you read the text. So we're drawing you in, okay, so that only if I make it interesting enough to you, that's when you say, okay, I'll spend the 8 minutes reading this article.
Right, and it's also really important, building on what you've just said, is to understand the context, right? Different businesses communicate with their audiences in different ways and at different touch points. So by the time people come to this website, they're not like all over Google. You really have to, you usually refer to these guys by an existing investor. So this is just they already assume all of the things that most investors talk about on their websites and in their brochures, the returns and, cap tables and all of the financial information. That's given, because everybody knows that these guys are of a caliber, right? JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs, doesn't need to prove to you that they're a big bank. We already know that. So tell me something I don't know. Tell me something interesting. So that's what this was about, right? Giving them something interesting to talk about in a first meeting with a client and create that connection. So clearly when it comes to thinking about, well, how are we, they need to have a brochure or something that they can hand out to people. Well, that's clearly not going to be about financial services. We're not going to have bullet point lists of services and products that they have, because that's banal. That's the stuff that everybody talks about. The story that people want to understand is the story about discovery. I mentioned earlier before they had invested in this crazy coal technology company. So when we talk about discovery and curiosity, that's what this is about. It's about finding opportunities in the most unexpected places. So it's a good strategy informs the way that you tell a story.
Present yourself to the world.
The way that you present yourself to the world, and that's a differentiation that you should be able to keep consistent many years into the future if it's built on something solid. So this was, I think, a good example of how we take a company that had no product to say, no differentiation in terms of product or tech, but we were able to find something much bigger, much more interesting to connect them with the people that they needed to convince. I want to give another example now of a company that did have amazing technology, right? Did have a cutting edge product, but were still struggling to engage and convince the people that they needed to. So Savann Innovation had developed a breakthrough medical device that could extend the life of cancer patients in remission by 7.5 months, which was a huge, like in the world of cancer, a huge breakthrough. But they were struggling when we met them to engage the medical community, oncologists, medical directors. And it wasn't too difficult to understand why. I'm just going to show you some examples of the type of marketing materials where they were telling their story. This is the type of thing that you need to set aside, half an hour to sit down and study and unpack and work out yourself. And there were all sorts of different examples. This is just, slides from presentations, LinkedIn, social media, a lot of history, and all of this is legitimate. These are all reasons to believe that the product will work, but it's not what doctors and oncologists needed to hear to get on board, right? So our challenge at this point was to find out, well, what do doctors already know to be true? What do they need to hear to be convinced? Because oncologists are already very, very aware of the challenges that they face in their profession and in looking after patients. And I'm not going to bore you too much with care methodologies for recovering cancer patients, but this is actually where we found the real problem. This is the problem that doctors were already aware of, and this is what we ultimately used to tell the story. So when you recover, when you have gone to like the initial cancer treatment, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, whatever, you then go into a follow-up period where you're getting a CT scan every 6 months, thereabouts, to monitor your health. Now, this is all fine, but the major problem is, of course, that if, God forbid, the cancer does come back, it comes back between a scheduled scan. So if you had your scan here and the cancer reappears, a week or a month later, it's not going to get detected for weeks or months afterwards. And by this stage, by the time it is detected, the patient's health has deteriorated and their options are much fewer. And we spoke to oncologists before, in the research phase, and they told us that one of their greatest frustrations was having to turn around to a patient who they couldn't help and have to say to them, if only I had known sooner, right? The terrible frustration that they basically were not being given a fair chance by the system to get the best outcomes for their patients. Now, very, very briefly, what Savann's product and their technology does to change this so much is in between these sort of 6-month scans, they allow the patient to report their symptoms, right? Because symptoms is like the first indication that there's a problem. They allow the patient to report their symptoms on a weekly basis. In fact, whenever they find a symptom that's a bit abnormal. And the system can then detect an abnormal symptom immediately and send an alert to the medical team. Now, this is huge because it means that all of this time where the doctors did not know that there was a problem, the patient was deteriorating, this is time lost, right? That's time lost. Now they can identify the problem much earlier and they can treat it more effectively. So what was our insight? Our insight was, and this is something that you could ask any doctor or any oncologist, you could ask them, isn't it true that the earlier we can detect a problem, the better we can treat it? And every doctor, every medical professional will say yes. It's what Ariel said before, it's something that they already know to be true. And this is what they need to hear. So what do you do with this? We're clearly not going to continue to talk about, we're not going to put the product on the front or how it happens. We're going to celebrate something that's much bigger than us and the product and even our own company. And that is celebrate the whole idea of early detection, early, okay? So early is on time is a message that medical professionals, oncologists already know to be true, right? And this is the conversation that they want to be having because this is what's important to them. So it doesn't matter who we are, what our product is. We're going to get to talk about that sometime. But imagine, I don't know if any of you have been to a medical conference, a medical technology conference, but you've got these huge big halls and you have massive big booths of like the big companies, and they've all got the same messages. It's all, AI and artificial intelligence and machine learning. Everything is about tech. And then, and the doctors' heads is just, they're just swimming because they see the same messages, and it's all about product and technology. But wherever they meet the message, this is the conversation they want to be having, and this is how you get them interested and how you engage them. And this is what we do with all of the clients that we work with. It's about finding, like, the truth is out there, as I used to say in X-Files. It's just a matter of being able to find out what people really care about. And particularly, I'd like to say, particularly these days where we're still in the early days of a lot of amazing technologies, like I said before, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Everybody's talking about that now. But in a few years' time, that's going to be what powers everything, and it's not going to be interesting anymore. What's always more interesting, what people always want to hear about, what fires up their imagination is not the technology, but what technology can make possible. And the future is how it can impact our lives and our businesses. So there's always a bigger story to tell about yourself, your venture, your company, that's bigger than the product itself. And that is something that needs to be researched and needs to be found out. And it's led by curiosity. You need to actually stop and think, okay, this is what I do in my 9 to 5. Who I want to convince has their own concerns and they want something else. How can I make that relevant? And you work back from what somebody already knows to be true and what they need to hear. You work that back to what you want to say, not the other way around.
Okay, thank you. I just want to stress the point. Both in the two case studies that we've shown you, that we've done, and stuff that you've seen before from the world of advertising, you'll notice that it all starts from trying to understand who it is that you're talking to, okay, and understanding what it is that makes, what will get them interested. In this case, we didn't go out and say, okay, what do doctors need to hear? That's not what our process looks like. Our process, we know that the first thing, we know that among other things, we need to talk to the people who are going to be hearing these messages. What we're looking for is we're looking for an inherent truth within the information that we're talking about, whatever world each one of you people lives in. There is information to be sent out, okay? And there are people out there who need to hear it, whoever they are. In this case, a company that had a product that needed to get doctors interested, okay? So when we went out and we sifted through all the information, guy went out and talked to oncologists, we talked to people within the company, we talked to other people, but from within that information, we got the fact that CTs are done every 6 months and that the product puts in little things in between that. And when we saw that, we said, okay, that's what needs to be brought out. Okay? So you're looking for something that rings true and it's intuitive. Once you see it, you say yes. I just want to show you this. This is the presentation that you've just seen. I'm showing you this slide in order for you to understand that we also had some information to get across in this presentation, okay? And the way we put together this presentation is we need to lead people from point A to point B. And there's a story to be told. There's a reason for each one of these slides on the way, but we're not looking at a slide and saying, this is a nice looking slide, this is a good slide, there's a linear, there's a journey that we're taking you through from where you are to something that we want you to understand that maybe you didn't understand when you walked into this room. So that takes me to our questions and answers. But before that, Guy actually said to me, listen, we have to have takeaways in this presentation. What's the takeaway? Okay. So I'm going to turn that back to you guys. And I'm going to ask you what are you taking away from this presentation? Anyone? Anything that you can take and use in your world. Anybody?
Yeah, try and find that. Search for the truth. Search for the truth that the other person has.
What would you? How would you do that practically?
Well, you have to listen. You have to talk and you have to listen. And I think one of the things when you spend your life making lots and lots and lots of pictures and presentations is that there's a temptation to go in and sell.
Do your
Like,
spiel.
because the pressure on you is to bring results. And how do you bring results? You know, and how do you prepare yourself for a presentation and build the presentation in a way that you can do enough listening to on one leg change your presentation to answer that question. And I don't know whether you can do it before. Obviously, you can try and do it before, but you never really understand a company or an investor until you're sitting opposite them. So finding techniques to do that.
I absolutely agree. I think I used to have presentations about creativity, about like the world of creativity within advertising, which would end with an image of an ear, and I would say this is the most important tool a creative can have. That's true, because that insight, that truth that you're looking for, you can only reach it by listening. If you come in if you think you know, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So thank you. Anybody else?
I really like the whole investigation into like the idea of the dog whistle, because I think that so many of us are exposed to maybe strategies that deal with reaching the most people at the all the people all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that the dog whistle kind of straightens some things in my head for me about what it means to really target somebody.
Yeah. I think there are some products and services which cater to everybody. I can think of a couple, but I think in most of the work that we've done, and definitely all the work that we've shown here, you're catering to a very specific audience. There's something to be said about a message, like think The Economist. When that message goes out, it's saying there's a closed what's the word I'm looking for? Like a
Community?
social, like a club.
Yeah.
There's a club, and you're already part of it. Now that attitude says to like you already feel, okay, yeah, they know who I am. I'll give you an example. You use Adobe, right? A little bit. I use Adobe stuff all the time, the products, Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, or whatever. A few years ago, Adobe became digital, meaning you couldn't buy the discs anymore. You had to buy and a lot of people were against that. And I said, okay, I'll try it out. Nice. And the next thing that happened is that whenever the new version of Photoshop came out, it's installed on my. It's like on your telephone. There's like the new version is installed automatically. So I thought, oh, that's nice. And the next thing that happened is that Adobe said, oh, now we have like a font library that's open to you. You can just go in and use it. Now, whoever knows graphic design knows that fonts are like a huge part of graphic design. Like you choose your font, and it used to be you had to pay loads of money for a font and whatever. All of a sudden, Adobe just like there you are. There's a library of fonts for you to use. That attitude from Adobe to me made me think they know who I am, they know how I work, and they're actually bringing me solutions before I ask for them. So that starts building a bond between me and a company, a product, whatever. So I think again, it goes back to an attitude. I think the attitude that Adobe is showing is that we know who you are and we care for you, or we want you enough as a client that we're going to give you stuff that makes you understand that we know how you work. So yeah.
I think the dog whistle analogy isn't. It's maybe a little bit It's good for a specific audience because only a specific audience hears. But if you like broaden it out a little bit, it can also be sort of like it's like a wink. It's like a kritza for what people really know to be important, right? I don't know if you remember, but many years ago in the States there was a famous campaign to encourage people to drink more milk. For years they had been trying to convince people to drink more milk, calcium for your bones and for healthy development and stuff, and it fell on deaf ears. People knew they knew that that was like a good reason, and they knew that milk was good for them, but it didn't convince them to drink more. Until they came up with this a great campaign, Goodby and Silverstein got milk. Okay, and it was a whole like series of ads around situations where you'd like die if you didn't have milk. You know, just baked some chocolate chip cookies, or I'm eating like it was all American, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and my mouth is all, you know, it's all bunged up, and I need something to drink it down. Like it's those moments, they played on moments where people were terrified to have run out of milk. Now, I don't know whether it was a dog whistle, but they weren't convincing to people to drink milk for the reasons that they thought that people should be always make sure they have milk in the house, because that's not relevant. It's not relevant why you think somebody should do something. But they were able to tap into a phenomenon and an experience that hundreds of millions of people, milk consumers around the world, or certainly in the States, could relate to. And they basically got people to drink milk by playing on that terror of running out of it. And it was all based around everyday situations that we can understand. So that in some way was a way of saying, well, I know why you really care. I know what you really think about running out of milk. I know that this is something that really terrifies you. Forget the bones and your children's healthy development. We're not going to talk about that now. So again, it's about, I think, what people really care about, and it can work. It doesn't matter whether you're speaking to consumers. A lot of people think that, you know, all this messaging and the branding and stuff, it's only really relevant or most relevant in consumer marketing, and then in B2B, people, you know, people think very rationally, and we're speaking to procurement officers in a hell or we're speaking to cybersecurity, we're speaking to CISOs and stuff, and that none of this storytelling is relevant. But these people also have things that are important to them, you know. Oncologists are clinicians with no patients, very serious. They've got years and years of expertise. They have that much knowledge in their minds. And the approach of a lot of, you know, medical startup companies coming out of Israel is to bamboozle them with things that they're not interested in. They're clinicians. They're interested in patient outcomes. They don't give a damn whether you wave a magic wand or you have some smart algo. It doesn't matter to them. What matters is the new reality that you can create for them. So making this, bridging this sort of disconnection that exists is something that can apply to every vertical, political campaigns, consumer goods. It's just how it's how we connect to stories and ideas and buy into them.
Yes.
First of all, thank you. I think it was great. One of the greatest lectures that I've seen in the marketing field, and I see many all the time.
Thank you. What's your name?
Shlomit.
Shlomit.
So we also work in the medical field, and I'm really happy that you gave an example, because I think that one of the challenges is that you work with doctors which are really conservative, and there are people of facts that they like facts and
Yep.
graphs, and if you want to provide them a decision support tool, you need to show them how it's going to work, and there is tension between sales and marketing, which is there is like a reliability question, but I think that it made me think again about them as human beings that
Yep.
we need to be empathic for, and think about how to think about what makes them interested in our product, and I
Exactly.
really like the popcorn thing. I think we're going to use this when we talk to them, and it really made me understand how do I simplify our whole complicated solution into
Yep.
one coherent message that they would like to hear.
Great.
I think it was very
Fantastic. So,
Music to my ears. Now, I don't want to like downgrade. There are graphs, and there is proof, and there's evidence-based proof. But that's stuff that you'll pull out for the second meeting, for the third meeting, right? A lot of the challenges lie, and so many amazing technologies, literally life-saving technologies, don't get the traction that they need because they bore the life out of people in the first meeting or the first pitch. And again, you've got to think of them as clinicians. You've got to think of the things that interest them in their world. They're medical professionals. They'll never be interested in technology. They're interested in a lot of diagnostic support, right? AI-powered diagnostic support, but that's the type of language that they're telling their story in. And it's not rocket science. You don't need a huge budget to be able to work out how to make things simple and relevant to people. Get them into the first meeting, halfway through the second or the third, they're going to have their due diligence anyway.
Okay, but Shlomit, but from what you said, I want to pull out something. Because you said, okay, so you understand that you need to go back and kind of distill your messages. It's not just about making it short. There's something that's underlying here that I didn't talk about before, but I want you to understand. It's about giving people a reason, all right? Meaning, if you go back to The Economist, the reason is this magazine will make you smarter and you'll do better. These guys, the medical, it was talking to doctors and saying, isn't it true that if you have the information earlier, you'll be able to give better treatment? The answer needs to be, of course. And now, once you have that, of course, you've engaged them. You have them. Okay. Now you can get the other. Now all you have to do is convince, meaning you have to prove that you stand behind what you just said. Okay. Anybody else?
I can tell a little story.
Yes.
About Sivan. Because 2 years ago, when I came to Sivan, and I saw this brochure with a lot of information inside, I got a headache. And I immediately called Ariel and I told him, listen, you have to help me. Because I cannot do anything with this. And the thing is that the deployment team went to the hospitals with these brochures, and the oncologists don't have time, and they just look at this brochure and they say, you know what, I don't have time, leave me alone, and they couldn't do their work. So when we did the investigation, and they really drilled deep inside to find this one word, like this message that will be true for every stakeholders, not only oncologists, but for the patients and the health organizations and for everyone. But then it was not easy because we have a lot of medical director and the COO and a lot of people in the company that said, but what about the graphs and the clinical trials? And there's a lot of information to say, and we can't say just early. But I think we convinced them finally, and we said, yeah, we have a lot to say. It's not going to be at the first meeting, and it's not going to be at the first thing that you're going to give to the oncologist or the health organization manager. You're going to say one thing that it's the most important thing. It will be like relevant for everyone, and afterwards we can say the whole story. What I can tell you that the process that we did together was so important, because last month when we went to London and we had only 3 minutes to convince investors in a room, we used only 2 minutes. And then all the other started, you're not going to use all the 3 minutes? And I said, no, we need like short messages, and it's true because after the short introduction, 2 minutes, only 2 minutes, early, the timeline, the idea, they came to us and they say, we want to hear more.
That's what it's about.